The firewood appeared on Darya Kozlov's porch every morning before dawn, stacked with military precision, and it made her want to scream. She did not need charity. She did not need pity. She had survived 3 winters alone with her daughter after her husband died in the border wars, and she would survive this one the same way she had survived everything else, through her own strength, her own labor, her own stubborn refusal to break. The fact that someone in this frontier settlement thought she required help, thought her incapable, thought her weak enough to need anonymous gifts like some helpless widow, burned hotter than any fire the wood could make. Darya stood on her porch in the gray light of early morning, her green hands clenched into fists, her small tusks bared in frustration. The stack was perfect. Not thrown carelessly, not dumped in a pile, but arranged with care, each piece of split oak placed to interlock with the next. That somehow made it worse. Someone was spending time on this, putting effort into their pity. Her daughter Mira, barely 6 years old, with her father's gentle eyes and her mother's green skin, peered around the doorframe. "Mama, is the wood back?" "Go inside and eat your breakfast," Darya said, forcing her voice to soften. "I will handle this." She had tried everything. She had left the wood untouched for 3 days, hoping the anonymous benefactor would take the hint. The stacks had continued to appear, growing larger as if to compensate for her refusal. She had moved the wood to the edge of the forest, only to find it back on her porch the next morning. She had even stayed up one night, determined to catch the culprit, but had fallen asleep just before dawn and woken to find yet another stack waiting. There were only 4 other homesteads within reasonable distance of her small plot of land. The Havershams were elderly and could barely manage their own woodpile. The Pickering family had 6 children and no time for charity. The Vernons kept to themselves and had made their distaste for orcs abundantly clear. That left only one possibility: Zane Larkin. He lived alone on the property adjacent to hers, a quiet man in his early 30s who had arrived 2 years ago and built his cabin with his own hands. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that was always slightly too long and eyes the color of slate. He smiled easily, spoke little, and moved with the kind of casual confidence that came from men who had seen enough of the world to know their place in it. Darya had spoken to him perhaps a dozen times in 2 years, mostly brief exchanges about property lines or warnings about wolves in the area. She did not want to owe him anything. She did not want to owe anyone anything. Darya pulled her worn cloak around her shoulders and marched across the frost-hard ground between their properties. The sun was just beginning to lift above the tree line, painting the snow-covered fields in shades of rose and gold. Smoke rose from Zane's chimney in a straight line. He was awake then. Good. She pounded on his door hard enough to rattle the frame. He opened it almost immediately, as if he had been standing right there. He was dressed for the day in work clothes, his sleeves already rolled up despite the cold. His expression was pleasant, unsurprised. "Morning, Darya. Stop leaving firewood on my porch," she said. The words came out harsher than she intended, but she did not take them back. He studied her for a moment. His eyes had a strange quality in the morning light, slightly unfocused, as if he was looking at her but also past her. All right. She had prepared an entire speech. She had rehearsed it during the walkover, building her case about independence and pride and the insult of unsolicited charity. His immediate agreement knocked every word out of her head. "What?" I said, "all right." His voice was calm, easy. "I will stop. Just like that, just like that." He leaned against the doorframe, still smiling slightly. "Anything else I can help you with?" The complete lack of resistance made her anger sputter and die. She had expected an argument, justifications, perhaps even offense. Instead, he had simply agreed, as if her request was the most reasonable thing in the world. It left her feeling strangely deflated. "No, that is all. Then I hope you have a good day, Darya." He stepped back and closed the door gently, leaving her standing alone on his porch. She walked back to her cabin slowly, some of the righteous fury draining out with each step. Mira was sitting at their small table, eating porridge with the serious concentration that children brought to simple tasks. She looked up when Darya entered. "Did you yell at Mr. Larkin?" "I did not yell," Darya said, though she had a little. "I asked him to stop something and he agreed." "What did you ask him to stop?" "Nothing you need to worry about. Finish your breakfast." The next morning, there was no firewood on her porch. Darya told herself this was exactly what she wanted. She spent the morning splitting logs from the cord of wood she had purchased in autumn, her axe biting into the frozen timber with satisfying cracks. Her shoulders ached by midday and her hands were raw despite her thick gloves, but the work felt good. Honest. Earned. The morning after that, her porch remained empty. She split more wood. Winter deepened. The snows came heavier, piling in drifts against the north wall of her cabin. Darya worked every day, rationing the wood carefully, calculating how much they would need to last until spring. She hunted when she could, checking her trap lines in the forest and bringing home rabbits and the occasional deer. She mended clothes by firelight while Mira slept, patching patches until the fabric was more repair than original material. She did not see Zane Larkin. She told herself she was not avoiding him, but she also did not walk past his property anymore. She took the long way to the settlement when she needed to trade pelts for flour and salt. 6 weeks after her confrontation, the temperature dropped so low that the sap in the trees froze and cracked the trunks with sounds like musket fire. Darya woke before dawn to find frost on the inside of the windows, and Mira shivering in her bed despite being buried under every blanket they owned. She fed the fire, watching their depleted woodpile with growing dread. She had miscalculated, or perhaps the winter was simply colder than usual. Either way, they were going to run out within a week, maybe less, and she could not split frozen wood fast enough to keep up with what they burned. "Mama, I am cold," Mira whispered, her breath forming clouds. "I know, little one. Stay in bed, I will make it warm." Darya loaded the fire higher than she should have, burning through another day's worth of wood in a single morning. She spent that day in the forest, hauling fallen branches back to the cabin, anything she could break or cut that might burn. It was exhausting work, and the yield was poor. Deadfall was scarce, and what existed was buried under snow. She worked until her hands were numb and her back screamed in protest, and still it was not enough. That night, she lay awake listening to the wind howl around the cabin and the fire settle into coals. She thought about Zane Larkin and his perfect stacks of firewood. She thought about how quickly he had agreed to stop. She thought about pride and survival, and what her daughter would say if Darya let stubbornness freeze them both. But she could not bring herself to cross that frozen distance between their cabins. She could not bring herself to ask. The woodpile dwindled. Darya began burning furniture. A broken chair first, then a stool with a cracked leg. She eyed the second bed, the one that had belonged to her husband, and felt something crack inside her chest. Mira stopped complaining about the cold. That was worse than the complaints. She just huddled near the fire, quiet and pale, her lips faintly blue. On the 7th week, Darya walked into the settlement to trade her last good pelt for food. The trading post was warm, heated by a massive iron stove, and the sudden blast of heat made her dizzy. She conducted her business quickly, trying not to let anyone see how her hands shook. Outside, she heard the voices. "Larkin. Oh, he will not make it through the winter," Shame, really, seemed like a decent fellow. Darya paused near the corner of the building, hidden in the shadow. "What is wrong with him?" a woman's voice asked. "Going blind, isn't he?" "Happening slowly, but it is happening. He can barely see past his own hands now. Come spring, he will be completely useless. Cannot work, cannot hunt, cannot contribute. Town will have to take him on as charity, and we have got enough mouths to feed. I heard he was in the army. Quartermaster or some such. That was before whatever is eating his sight got bad. Now he is just another burden waiting to happen." Darya's breath caught. She stood frozen, the cold biting through her cloak while the words settled into her mind like stones. Going blind. The way he had looked at her that morning, slightly unfocused. The way he had opened his door so quickly, as if he had been waiting right there because he needed to be close to hear the knock. The precision of the wood piles, pieces interlocked by touch rather than sight. He had been leaving her firewood in the dark before dawn, because those were the hours when failing sight mattered least, when he could still work by feel and memory and stubborn determination. He had not been offering charity. He had been giving what he could while he still could, proving to himself that he was still useful, still capable, still worth something before the darkness took even that away, and she had told him to stop. The walk home took forever. Darya stumbled through drifts, her mind 1,000 miles away. She had been so certain of his motivations, so ready to see pity where none existed. She had been so focused on her own pride that she had completely missed his. When she reached her cabin, she did not go inside. She turned and looked across the snow-covered distance to Zane's property. His cabin looked exactly as it always did. Smoke from the chimney. Woodpile visible near the side wall, though smaller than it had been in autumn. Everything neat and maintained, but now she saw it differently. She saw it as a man might maintain it who was slowly losing the ability to see what he was maintaining. She saw the careful systems, the rigid organization required when you could not simply glance around to find what you needed. She thought about him stacking firewood by touch in the frozen darkness, his hands learning the shape of each log. She thought about him agreeing so easily to stop, not because he did not care, but because her pride mattered more to him than his need to feel useful. She thought about the past 7 weeks, the coldest weeks, and she wondered how much of his own woodpile he had intended for her porch before she had driven him away. Darya walked home. She fed Mira thin soup for dinner. She burned the last of the broken furniture. And when Mira finally fell asleep, Darya sat by the dying fire and cried. She cried for her foolishness. She cried for her stubborn, stupid pride. She cried because a good man had been trying to help her, and she had thrown it back in his face. She cried because she was cold and tired and frightened and alone. And she had made herself more alone by pushing away the one person in this settlement who had seen her as something other than a burden or a monster or a recipient of pity. She cried because she had fallen in love without realizing it. Somewhere between the first morning, she found the firewood and the moment she had told him to stop. She had fallen in love with anonymous kindness, with careful stacks of oak in the darkness, with someone who gave without expecting anything in return. And she had only understood it now, when it was too late and the cold was killing them both in different ways. The fire went out. Darya sat in the darkness. When the first light of dawn began to gray the windows, she finally stood. Her body ached. Her hands were raw. Her daughter was freezing, and she had a choice to make: pride or survival, isolation or connection, fear or trust. Darya wrapped herself in her cloak and walked out into the bitter morning. Zane's door was solid under her knock. She did not pound this time. She rapped gently and waited. He opened the door slowly. His hair was disheveled, his eyes shadowed with lack of sleep. He looked thinner than she remembered. He blinked at her, his gaze tracking slightly past her face before correcting. "Darya, I need help." The words came out strangled, each one cutting her throat on the way up. "Please, I need help." His expression shifted, the pleasant mask falling away to reveal something raw underneath. Relief, maybe, or validation. "Come inside, you are freezing. My daughter, bring her, bring whatever you need. There is room." He stepped back, opening the door wider, and the warmth from his fire rolled out like an embrace. Darya wanted to argue. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to qualify, to make it clear this was temporary and transactional and not charity. But Mira was cold and they were burning beds, and she was so tired of fighting alone. "I will get her," she said quietly. She carried Mira across the frozen distance, wrapped in every blanket they owned. Her daughter was light, too light, and barely woke during the transfer. Zane had stoked his fire high and laid out blankets near the hearth. He did not hover, did not offer unwanted help, just stepped back and let Darya settle her daughter in the warmth. Mira's eyes fluttered open. She looked around in confusion. "Mama, we are at Mr. Larkin's house." "Just for a little while." Darya smoothed her daughter's hair back. "Because we ran out of wood." Mira's voice was drowsy. "Because I made a mistake." Darya looked up and found Zane watching them with an expression she could not quite read. "Because I was wrong and stubborn, and I hurt someone who was trying to be kind." "You did not hurt me," Zane said quietly. "I did." She stood, facing him properly. "You were leaving the Firewood." "Yes." "Why?" He was silent for a long moment. His eyes drifted slightly to the left before he corrected, focusing on her with visible effort. "I wanted to help, that is all." "That is not all." She took a step closer. "You can barely see." His jaw tightened. "I can see enough. For how much longer, I do not know." The admission came out harsh. "A few months, maybe. Maybe less. The healers do not know what is causing it. Nothing they try makes any difference. So I have been doing what I can while I can, and leaving Firewood for a woman and her daughter alone in the winter seemed like a thing worth doing." He turned away, his hands flexing at his sides. "You had every right to tell me to stop. It was presumptuous. I should have asked first. I thought you pitied me. I admired you." He said it simply, still not looking at her. "You work harder than anyone I have ever seen. You provide for your daughter alone. You never complain, never beg, never demand special treatment despite half the settlement treating you like you are less than human because of your skin. I did not pity you. I was in awe of you." The words hit her like hammers. Darya opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Then why did you stop so easily when I asked?" Now he did turn back. His smile was sad. "Because I realized that my need to feel useful was not more important than your need to feel capable. You asked me to stop, so I stopped. Even though it killed me a little. Even though I spent the last 7 weeks wondering if you were all right and telling myself I had no right to check. I am not all right." The confession came out broken. "I ran out of firewood. I have been burning furniture. Mira is so cold at night that she barely moves. And I was too proud to come ask for help until now, until I heard people in the settlement talking about you, and I realized." She stopped, her throat closing around the words. "Realized what?" "That you were not giving me pity. You were giving me everything you had." She moved closer, close enough that she could see the details his failing eyes might miss. The freckle near his left ear, the small scar on his chin, the way his pupils did not quite focus together anymore. "And I threw it back in your face because I was too damaged and too scared to understand what you were offering." What was I offering? His voice was barely a whisper. Kindness, partnership, a future where neither of us has to be alone. She reached up slowly, giving him time to track the movement, and laid her palm against his cheek. His skin was warm despite the cold that leaked through every crack in the cabin walls. "I am sorry. I am so sorry." He covered her hand with his own. His fingers were calloused, scarred across the knuckles from work and old fights. "You have nothing to apologize for." "I have everything to apologize for. You were losing your sight and still trying to take care of me, and you were protecting yourself and your daughter." "That is not something to apologize for." He turned his head slightly, pressing his face more firmly into her palm. "But if you are here now, if you are asking for help now, then we can move forward, together." "I do not know how to do together." The admission cost her. "I have been alone for so long. I was a quartermaster for 12 years. I know how to organize, how to plan, how to make resources stretch further than they should be able to go. But my eyes are failing, and eventually I will not be able to do any of that without help." He took a breath. "You are strong. You work hard. You know this land and how to survive on it. Between us, we have everything we need. You can be my eyes. I can be your support. We can keep each other alive." It was not a declaration of love. It was not romance or poetry or any of the things she had imagined as a girl. It was practical and honest and raw, and it was exactly what she needed to hear. "Yes," she said. "Yes." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his whole face. "Then let us start with the immediate problem. You need firewood. I have firewood. My pile is more than enough for 2 households if we are smart about it. I will split more. I will replace what we use. We will split more, together when the weather breaks." He finally released her hand and stepped back. "For now, let your daughter get warm. I will make breakfast. Then we can figure out how to make this work long term." Darya glanced at Mira, who had fallen back asleep in the nest of blankets, her face already losing some of its pale tension in the warmth. "She likes you. She has asked about you." "I like her too. She is brave, like her mother." Zane moved toward his small kitchen area, his steps careful, his hands trailing along the wall and furniture to keep his bearings. "How do you feel about porridge?" "I feel like it is a miracle food that has kept us alive all winter." He laughed, and the sound filled the cabin with something that had been missing from Darya's life for longer than she cared to admit. Hope, maybe. Or just the simple comfort of not being alone. They ate together as the sun rose higher. Zane's porridge was better than hers, enriched with honey and dried apples that he had stored from autumn. Mira woke properly and ate 2 bowls, her eyes wide at the luxury of being truly full. She chattered at Zane with the easy comfort of a child who had never learned to fear orc-hating humans, and he listened with patient attention, his eyes tracking her voice even when they could not quite track her movement. After breakfast, Darya and Zane went outside to assess their combined resources. His woodpile was indeed substantial, neatly stacked against the side of his cabin under a shelter. He had built the shelter himself, he explained, using measurements he had memorized before his sight got too bad. Everything was organized by size and type, a system that allowed him to find what he needed by touch. "You can still split wood?" Darya asked, watching him run his hands over the logs. "I can, but it is getting dangerous. I misjudged a swing 2 weeks ago and nearly buried the axe in my leg." He said it matter-of-factly without self-pity. "So I have been rationing what I have and trying to figure out what I will do when it runs out. You will have me. I can split wood. Can you do it without destroying your shoulders? Because I saw how you were moving this morning." "You have been overworking." She wanted to deny it, but he was right. Her shoulders were a constant ache, and her lower back had started to spasm when she bent wrong. "I was doing what I had to do. And now you have someone to share the work with. Let me help you, please." He turned toward her, his eyes not quite meeting hers. "I know I cannot see properly, but there are 100 things I can still do. I can cook. I can mend. I can organize and plan. I can entertain your daughter while you work so you do not have to watch her every second. Let me be useful." The plea underneath the practical words made her chest ache. This was a man who had spent his whole life being competent, being needed, being valuable. And now his body was betraying him, stealing the one sense that modern humans relied on most, and he was terrified of becoming a burden. She understood that fear intimately. "We will both be useful," she said firmly. "We will help each other. That is the agreement. That is the agreement." He held out his hand. She took it. His grip was strong and warm, and she did not let go as quickly as she might have. They developed a routine. Darya moved the essential items from her cabin to Zane's, which was larger and better insulated. They combined their food stores, their tools, their resources. Zane had salt and sugar, luxuries she had run out of months ago. Darya had furs and winter herbs she had gathered in autumn. Together they had enough to last until spring if they were careful. Darya took over the physical labor that required sight. She split firewood, using Zane's system to stack it neatly by size. She checked the trap lines, following the paths he described through the forest. She made small repairs to the cabin, replacing a rotted board here, sealing a gap there. Zane handled everything else. He cooked meals that were vastly superior to anything Darya had managed on her own, using spices and techniques from his years in the army. He organized their stores with military precision, creating systems that made everything easy to find. He mended clothes by touch, his fingers tracing seams and tears with practiced ease. He told Mira stories about faraway places, keeping her entertained during the long winter evenings when going outside meant risking frostbite. Slowly, carefully, they became a unit. Darya learned to describe things in detail, painting word pictures for Zane when he needed to understand a situation. She learned to warn him before moving things, to keep pathways clear, to touch his arm gently when approaching so she did not startle him. Zane learned to trust her judgment, to ask for help without shame, to accept his limitations without letting them define his worth. They learned each other. Darya discovered that Zane had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. That he sang quietly while cooking, old army marching songs with surprisingly raunchy lyrics. That he had joined the military at 16 to escape a father who drank too much and hit too hard, and had found a home among the quartermasters who valued brains over brawn. That his sight had started failing 2 years ago, a gradual dimming that the army healers could not explain or stop, and that he had left the service before he could become a liability to his unit. Zane discovered that Darya had wanted to be a scholar before the war, that she had taught herself to read from stolen books, and could recite poetry in 3 languages. That her husband had been kind but simple, a farmer who loved the land and never understood her hunger for knowledge, and that she had mourned him more for Mira's sake than her own. That she was terrified of being weak, of asking for help, of becoming the burden that everyone expected orcs to be. That she had built walls around herself so thick that she had almost suffocated inside them. They talked late into the night while Mira slept, their voices low, sharing pieces of themselves they had thought lost forever. And somewhere in those conversations, in the quiet domestic rhythm of shared meals and combined labor, in the way Zane smiled when he heard her voice, and the way Darya's heart jumped when his hand accidentally brushed hers, they fell in love properly. It was not dramatic. There was no single moment of realization, no grand gesture. It was slow and steady and inevitable, like water wearing down stone. It was the comfort of not being alone. It was the trust built in 1,000 tiny exchanges. It was looking at each other and thinking, yes, this person, This is where I belong." The settlement noticed, of course. Gossip spread through the frontier community like fire through dry grass. Some disapproved vocally, muttering about unnatural relationships and proper boundaries. Others simply shook their heads and predicted disaster. A few, a precious few, offered quiet support in the form of extra supplies or friendly greetings. Darya and Zane ignored it all. They had spent too long worrying about what others thought. They were done with that now. The worst of winter passed. The days grew incrementally longer, the sun climbing a little higher each week. The killing cold eased into merely bitter cold, then into the sharp, bright chill that promised spring somewhere on the horizon. But Zane's eyes continued to fail. By the time the first thaw arrived, he could no longer see faces. He knew Darya by her voice, her scent, the particular weight of her footsteps. He knew Mira by her laughter and the way she hummed tunelessly while playing. But their features were lost to him, blurred into shapes and shadows that his mind could no longer resolve into detail. He did not complain. He adapted. He memorized layouts, created new systems, found ways to continue being useful even as his world narrowed to an arm's length of vague shapes, and then to nothing but light and darkness. Darya watched it happen with a helpless fury that had no target. She would have fought anything to stop it, would have killed anything that threatened him, but there was nothing to fight. Just biology, just the slow betrayal of his own body, just the cruel randomness of a condition that no healer could name or cure. On the first truly warm day of early spring, when the ice on the creek finally broke and the sound of running water returned to the valley, Zane stood outside the cabin and turned his face to the sun. "I cannot see it anymore," he said quietly. "I know it is there. I can feel the warmth. But I cannot see the light." Darya stood beside him, her hand in his. "Then I will see it for you. I will describe everything." "That is not the same." "No, but it is what we have." She squeezed his hand. "You told me once that between us we have everything we need. Do you still believe that?" He was silent for a long moment. Then he turned toward her, his sightless eyes directed at where he knew her face must be. "Yes, I still believe that. Then we will make it work, like we have made everything else work. People are talking. They are saying I am a burden now, completely useless. They are saying you are a fool for staying with me. People talk. People always talk. Let them." She reached up and cupped his face in both hands, forcing him to focus on her even if he could not see her. "You are not a burden. You are my partner. You are the person who keeps me sane and makes me laugh and helps me raise my daughter. You are the person I want beside me today and tomorrow and every day after that. Do you understand, Darya? Do you understand?" She made her voice firm, commanding. "Yes." His hands came up to cover hers. "Yes, I understand. Good. Now come inside. We have work to do." The work was reorganizing both properties into a single functioning homestead. Darya's old cabin was in poor repair, but the land was good. Zane's cabin was solid, but his fields needed clearing. Between them, they had enough acreage to plant a substantial crop, enough to feed themselves and have surplus to trade. They spent the early spring planning, Zane using his quartermaster training to calculate seed amounts, plot rotations, and resource allocation, while Darya sketched maps in the dirt and described the terrain in detail. Mira helped where she could, carrying small items and chattering endlessly about everything and nothing. When the ground thawed enough to work, they planted. Darya did the physical labor, turning soil and placing seeds, while Zane followed behind with the systems that would keep them organized. He drove stakes at measured intervals, tied string lines, created patterns that Darya could follow even in poor light. He could not see the work, but he could structure it, and his structures made everything easier. Neighbors came by occasionally, some to help, some to gawk, some to deliver opinions that nobody had asked for. The Havershams brought seed potatoes and stayed to help plant them, their old hands still steady. The Pickering children ran wild through the fields, playing with Mira, and generally being underfoot but enthusiastic. Even the Vernons stopped by once, though they spoke only to Zane and carefully avoided acknowledging Darya's presence. Through it all, Darya and Zane worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word. The settlement slowly, grudgingly began to accept them. It helped that their homestead was clearly thriving. It helped that Zane, despite his blindness, was still the most organized person in the valley and could be consulted on matters of logistics and planning. It helped that Darya was willing to help with difficult tasks, her orc strength making short work of jobs that would have taken others all day. But mostly it helped that they were so obviously devoted to each other that even the most determined gossip eventually ran out of steam. As spring progressed into early summer, Zane found Darya behind the cabin one morning, splitting wood. He heard the rhythmic thunk of the axe and followed the sound, his hand trailing along the cabin wall. "You are building up the woodpile," he observed, settling onto a bench near where she worked. "Yes." Thunk. Another log split cleanly. "We will not need that much until next winter, I know." Thunk. "So why now?" She set down the axe and wiped sweat from her forehead. "Because you left me firewood every morning and I was too stubborn to see it as the gift it was. So now I am making sure we have enough, for both cabins, for every morning." She paused. "For the rest of our lives, if you will have me." Zane went very still. "Is that a proposal?" "I do not know the human customs. Among orcs, when two people decide to build a life together, they simply do it. There is no ceremony required." She moved closer, standing directly in front of him so he would know exactly where she was. "But if you need ceremony, if you need words, then I will give them to you. Zane Larkin, will you marry me?" His smile started slow and spread until it transformed his whole face. "Yes, absolutely yes." He stood, reaching for her, and she stepped into his arms. "Though traditionally, I think I am supposed to be the one asking." "You already asked. Every morning with every piece of firewood, you asked me to let you care for me, to let you help me, to let you be part of my life. It just took me too long to answer." She pressed her face against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I am answering now. Yes, to all of it. Yes." They married at the spring equinox when day and night were equal and the world balanced on the edge between winter and summer. It was a small ceremony, held outside with the settlement's traveling priest officiating. The Havershams attended, and the Pickerings with all their children. A few others came out of curiosity or genuine goodwill. Darya wore her best dress, cleaned and mended until it was presentable. Zane wore his old army uniform, brushed until the wool showed its original color. Mira stood beside them, holding a bouquet of early wildflowers she had picked that morning, her face glowing with importance. The priest spoke about commitment and partnership, and building a life together. He carefully avoided mentioning anything about orc-human relations, or the impropriety some saw in the match. He was a practical man who had seen enough of the frontier to know that survival often required flexibility. Zane recited his vows by memory, his sightless eyes directed toward the sound of Darya's breathing. His voice was steady, clear, certain. "I promise to stand beside you, to support you, to trust you with my weaknesses and celebrate your strengths. I promise to be your partner in all things, for as long as we both live." Darya spoke hers in her own language first, the harsh, beautiful syllables of Orcish that few humans ever learned, and then translated into the common tongue. "I promise to be your eyes when you need them, your strength when you falter, your companion in darkness and light." I promise to build a life with you, to raise our family with you, to never turn away from you in fear or pride. This I swear on my blood and bone." They exchanged rings that Darya had carved from wood during the long winter nights, simple bands that had been polished smooth. They fit perfectly. The priest pronounced them married. Zane pulled Darya into a kiss that was chaste enough for public viewing, but held the promise of much more later. The small gathering applauded, and Mira threw flower petals that she had been clutching in her fist, scattering them in every direction but mostly onto her own head. They held a small celebration afterward, sharing food and drink with those who had come. Old Haversham played a fiddle, coaxing surprisingly lively music from the battered instrument, and people danced in the spring sunshine. Mira ran herself ragged playing with the Pickering children, her laughter carrying across the fields. As evening approached and guests began to head home, Darya stood with Zane at the edge of their property, looking out over the planted fields and the two cabins that were slowly becoming one homestead. "Are you happy?" she asked quietly. He turned toward her voice, reaching for her hand and finding it easily after months of practice. "Happier than I ever thought I would be, happier than I deserve. You deserve everything." She leaned against him, comfortable in the easy silence between them. "I was thinking. We should connect the two cabins properly. Build a covered walkway between them, maybe expand into a proper house eventually. That would take a lot of work. We have time, we have each other, we can do anything." She paused. "Though I might need your help with the planning. I am good with an axe, but you are better with measurements. I can do that." He was quiet for a moment. "Darya, can I ask you something? Always. When you found me that morning, when you finally came to ask for help, were you already in love with me? Or did that come later?" She considered the question seriously. It deserved a serious answer. "I think I was halfway in love with you from the first morning I found the firewood, but I did not have words for it. I did not know what I was feeling, only that I thought about you too much and looked for excuses to walk past your property. When I told you to stop, it was not because I did not care. It was because I cared too much and it terrified me." She turned to look at him, though he could not see her expression. "The tears came when I realized what I had thrown away, when I understood that you had been offering me something precious and I had rejected it. That was when I knew, when it was almost too late. It was not too late. No. But it was close." She raised his hand to her lips, kissing his scarred knuckles. "Thank you for not giving up on me, for still being here when I finally came to my senses. Thank you for coming back, for seeing past the surface to what I was really trying to say." He pulled her closer, wrapping both arms around her. "We are both stubborn fools, I think. The best kind of fools, the kind who find each other eventually." They stood together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red and purple. Zane could not see the colors, but Darya described them in detail, her voice soft, painting pictures with words. And he listened with a smile, his head resting against hers, content in a way he had not been since his sight began to fail. Mira came running up as darkness settled. "Mama, Mr. Zane, can we go inside now? I am tired." "He is not Mr. Zane anymore," Darya said gently. "He is part of our family now. You can call him Papa if you would like." Mira looked up at Zane with wide eyes. "Can I really?" Zane crouched down to her level, his hand reaching out to find her small shoulder. "I would be honored if you would call me Papa, if that is all right with you." "Yes," Mira launched herself at him, nearly knocking him over with her enthusiasm. "Yes, yes, yes, I have a papa now." He caught her, laughing, and stood with her in his arms. She was getting too big to carry easily, but he managed, holding her against his chest while she chattered excitedly about all the things they could do together now that he was officially her father. Darya watched them, her heart full to bursting. This was her family. This strange, cobbled-together, imperfect family that had formed out of pride and stubbornness, and eventually, finally, love. They went inside together. The cabin was warm, filled with the scent of the stew Darya had started that morning. They ate dinner as a family, Mira still bouncing with excitement, Zane patient and attentive, Darya content to watch them both and marvel at how her life had changed. After Mira was tucked into bed, exhausted from the day's excitement, Darya and Zane sat together by the fire. She had learned to keep the cabin slightly dim in the evenings, since bright light hurt his eyes even though he could not see it. He sat with his head tilted back, relaxed, his hand resting on her knee. "I have been thinking about the future," he said quietly. "About what happens when I cannot see it all anymore. You will adapt, like you have adapted to everything else. I will need more help. There will be things I simply cannot do, no matter how many systems we create. Then I will do them, or we will find someone else to help. Mira is getting older, she can take on more responsibility." Darya covered his hand with hers. "We will figure it out together. You are not worried." "I am terrified," she admitted, "but not because I doubt us. I am terrified because I love you and I hate watching you lose something precious. But we have survived worse than this. We will survive this too." He turned toward her, his expression serious. "What if the settlement decides I am too much of a burden? What if they refuse to trade with us or try to force us out? Then we will go somewhere else. Deeper into the frontier where people care more about capability than prejudice. We will make a life wherever we need to." She shifted closer, pressing her forehead against his. "You are not a burden. You are my husband, my partner, my family, and I will fight anyone who tries to take you from me. Even though I am blind, especially because you are blind. Because you face every day with courage and grace, because you refuse to give up, because you are still the same man who left me firewood in the dark and asked for nothing in return." She kissed him softly. "I did not fall in love with your eyes, Zane. I fell in love with your heart." He pulled her into a deeper kiss, his hands framing her face with surprising accuracy after months of practice. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he smiled. "I am the luckiest man alive. Yes, you are, and do not forget it." They went to bed shortly after, exhausted from the long day. Darya lay awake for a while, listening to Zane's breathing slow into sleep beside her, feeling the solid warmth of him against her side. She thought about the winter that had almost killed them both. She thought about pride and stubbornness, and all the ways people hurt themselves trying to be strong enough. She thought about firewood stacked in the darkness by hands that could barely see, and about the tears she had shed when she realized what she had thrown away. But mostly she thought about second chances, and how rare and precious they were, and how grateful she was that they had found each other before it was too late. Spring gave way to summer. The crops grew tall and green under Darya's careful tending. She worked the fields every day, her orc strength making her as effective as 3 human farmers. Zane managed the household, cooking and cleaning and organizing with military efficiency. Mira helped where she could and played when she could not, growing taller and stronger with each passing week. The homestead thrived. Neighbors who had been skeptical began to admit, grudgingly, that perhaps the strange orc-human partnership was working better than anyone had predicted. The Pickerings started bringing their surplus vegetables to trade. Old Haversham asked Zane's advice on crop rotation. Even the Vernons eventually thought enough to nod acknowledgement when they passed on the road. By midsummer, Darya was certain she was pregnant. She told Zane one evening after Mira had gone to bed. He was sitting by the fire, mending a shirt by touch, his fingers tracing the fabric for tears and weak spots. She sat down beside him and took the shirt gently from his hands. "I need to tell you something," she said. He immediately focused on her, his expression shifting to concern. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. Everything is very, very right." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." He went absolutely still. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be. All the signs are there. A baby." He said it wonderingly, his hand spreading across her stomach as if he could feel the tiny life already. "Our baby. Are you happy?" She was suddenly uncertain, realizing they had never discussed this, never planned for it. "Happy, Darya, I am beyond happy. I am terrified and amazed and so grateful I can barely breathe." He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "A baby, we are having a baby." She laughed, relief and joy mixing together. "Yes, we are. When? Winter, I think. Late winter or early spring. We will need to prepare. We will need supplies, better heating, a cradle." He was already planning, his quartermaster mind spinning through logistics. "We have time. We have months." She kissed his cheek. "And we have each other." "Yes." He relaxed slightly, his hand still resting on her stomach. "Yes, we do." They told Mira the next morning. She was delighted, immediately declaring that she would be the best big sister in the entire world and that the baby would be her special responsibility. She spent the rest of the day making plans that ranged from practical to wildly fantastical, and Darya did not have the heart to correct her. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Darya continued working the fields, slowing down only slightly as her belly grew. Zane fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more, eat more, let him handle tasks she had always done herself. They argued about it good-naturedly, finding compromises that satisfied them both. As summer faded into autumn and the crops came in, they harvested together. It was a good year, the yield substantial enough to feed them through the winter with plenty left to trade. Zane's careful planning had paid off. Darya's hard work had paid off. Together, they had created something that would sustain them. The settlement held a harvest festival, and Darya and Zane attended with Mira. It was the first large gathering they had been to since the wedding, and Darya was nervous about how they would be received. But the community surprised her. People greeted them warmly, congratulated them on the pregnancy, asked Zane's advice on storage and preservation. Children played with Mira without a second thought about her green skin. It was not perfect. There were still some who looked at them with disapproval or disgust. But they were the minority now, and their prejudice had lost its power to hurt. During the festival, old Haversham pulled Darya aside. "You and Larkin have done well," he said without preamble. "The settlement is better for having you here." "Thank you." She was surprised by the compliment. "No, thank you. You have shown people that different does not mean dangerous. That family comes in all forms. That love matters more than tradition." He patted her arm with his gnarled hand. "This old frontier needs more of that, more flexibility, more acceptance. You two are leading the way, whether you intended to or not." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing alone with tears prickling her eyes. That night, lying in bed with Zane's hand resting on her swollen belly and Mira snoring softly in the next room, Darya felt something she had not felt in years. Peace. Not happiness, though she was happy. Not contentment, though she was content. But peace. The deep, abiding sense that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, with exactly who she was supposed to be with, doing exactly what she was supposed to be doing. The baby kicked, a flutter against Zane's palm. He smiled in the darkness. "Strong. Like her mother," Darya said. "Her." "I think so. I cannot explain why, just a feeling." "Then I hope she has your strength and your courage." He leaned over and kissed her temple. And maybe my organizational skills, because someone in this family needs to know where things are kept." She laughed quietly. "I know where things are kept. You know where you last put them down, which is not the same thing. That has never been proven." They bantered gently until sleep took them, comfortable in the easy intimacy of partners who knew each other completely. Winter came early that year, the first snow falling before the autumn leaves had finished turning. Darya and Zane were prepared this time. Their combined woodpile was massive, stacked neatly under shelter. Their food stores were substantial and well organized. Their cabin was tight and warm, every crack sealed, every window covered against the cold. As Darya's pregnancy advanced, she slowed down more, letting Zane take on tasks that required less vision. He cooked elaborate meals, mended everything that could be mended, told stories to Mira for hours while Darya rested. He moved through the cabin with complete confidence now, every item in its place, every step memorized. On the coldest nights, when the wind howled around the cabin and the fire roared in the hearth, Darya would stand by the window and look across the distance to her old cabin. It was dark now, empty, slowly being reclaimed by the forest. But she could still remember standing on that porch, freezing and proud and alone, finding firewood every morning and hating it. She could remember the moment she had finally broken, crossing that distance to ask for help. The fear and shame and desperate hope that he might still care enough to let her in. "What are you thinking about?" Zane asked from his chair by the firewood. "How much I hated it, how much I needed it. Do you regret telling me to stop?" She turned to face him, even though he could not see her. "No, because it brought me here. If I had just accepted it silently, if I had never confronted you, we might never have talked, never connected. I needed to push you away so that I could understand what I was pushing away." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." He held out his hand. "Come here." She went to him, settling carefully onto his lap, her pregnant belly making the position awkward but not impossible. He wrapped his arms around her, his chin resting on her shoulder. "I stopped leaving firewood," he said quietly, "but I never stopped wanting to help you. I never stopped caring. I know." She covered his hands with hers. "And when I finally understood that, when I finally let myself accept help, it changed everything. For both of us." They sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the fire crackle and Mira's soft snoring from her bed. Outside, the wind screamed and the snow piled higher, but inside they were warm and safe and together. Darya went into labor on the night of the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. The pain started after dark, regular and insistent, and by midnight she knew the baby was coming soon. Zane sent Mira to fetch the midwife, bundling the girl in every warm thing they owned and watching anxiously from the door as she ran through the snow toward the Pickering's house. Mrs. Pickering was the closest thing the settlement had to a trained midwife, having delivered all 6 of her own children plus dozens more. The labor was long and difficult. Darya had given birth before, but this was different, harder, complicated by her orc physiology mixing with human biology in ways no one quite understood. Mrs. Pickering worked with calm efficiency, giving quiet instructions, encouraging and supporting. Zane stayed by Darya's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping sweat from her face, whispering encouragement that she probably could not hear over her own screaming. He could not see what was happening, could not help in any practical way, but he was there. Present, solid, real. "I hate you," Darya gasped during a particularly bad contraction. "I know, I love you too. This is your fault. Technically, it is half your fault. I am never doing this again. We can discuss that later." She would have hit him, but another contraction took her, and all she could do was grip his hand hard enough to bruise and scream. The baby was born as dawn broke on the shortest day of the year, announcing her arrival with a lusty cry that filled the cabin. "Mrs." Pickering cleaned her quickly and placed her in Darya's arms. A tiny squirming bundle with Zane's dark hair and Darya's green skin and eyes that were still unfocused, but would probably settle somewhere between her parents' colors. "A girl," Mrs. Pickering announced. "Healthy and loud." "Congratulations." Darya looked down at her daughter, at this perfect, impossible person who had come from her body, and felt her heart crack open in a way it never had before. "She is beautiful." "Can I hold her?" Zane asked quietly. Darya placed the baby carefully in his arms, guiding his hands to support her head. He held her with surprising confidence for a blind man, his fingers tracing her tiny features, learning her face the only way he could. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I am your papa. I cannot see you, but I can feel you, and you are perfect." The baby made a small sound, not quite a cry, almost a coo. She turned her head toward his voice. "She knows you," Darya said, her throat tight with emotion. "Of course she does. I have been talking to her for months." He smiled, and in that moment he looked younger than she had ever seen him. All the worry and fear and burden of blindness falling away to reveal simple joy underneath. "What should we name her?" They had discussed names, narrowing it down to a few favorites. But looking at her now, exhausted and overwhelmed and so deeply in love it hurt, Darya knew exactly what to call her. "Willa," she said. "Her name is Willa. Willa Larkin." Zane tested the name. "Yes, perfect, Mrs." Pickering helped Darya clean up and get settled in bed, then took Mira home with her to let the new family have some time alone. Mira had come back with her and was desperate to hold her new sister, but she was also exhausted from being up all night and did not protest too much when Mrs. Pickering promised she could visit later. Alone in the cabin, Darya and Zane lay together in bed with baby Willa between them. The sun rose higher, pale winter light filtering through the windows. The fire burned low. Everything was quiet except for the occasional small sound from the baby. "We did it," Darya said quietly. "We made a person. We made a family." Zane's hand found hers across the baby's small body. "A year ago I thought my life was over. I thought losing my sight meant losing everything that mattered, and now look at us." "Look at us," she agreed. "The blind quartermaster and the stubborn orc and two little girls who deserve better than both of us but seem to love us anyway. 3 little girls. Do not sell yourself short." She smiled, too tired to argue. 3 little girls. "Darya?" "Yes, thank you for coming back. That morning when you finally asked for help. Thank you for giving us a chance. Thank you for being worth coming back to." She yawned hugely. "Now let me sleep before I say something embarrassing about how much I love you. Too late. You just did. Shut up and hold your daughter." He laughed quietly and did exactly that, cradling Willa while Darya finally slept. The winter passed in a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings, and the particular chaos that comes with a newborn. Willa was a good baby as far as babies went, but she still required constant attention. Darya and Zane took turns walking her when she cried, soothing her when she fussed, changing her countless times each day. Mira was an enthusiastic helper, though her enthusiasm sometimes outpaced her capability. She insisted on holding Willa at every opportunity, singing to her in a tuneless voice that somehow always calmed the baby down. She helped fetch things, kept the fire going, and generally made herself useful in the way that 6-year-olds could. Zane adapted to fatherhood with the same systematic approach he brought to everything else. He could not see the baby, but he learned her sounds, her patterns, her needs. He could tell the difference between a hungry cry and a tired cry and a wet diaper cry. He changed diapers by touch, fed her bottles of Darya's milk, rocked her to sleep with practiced ease. Neighbors stopped by regularly, bringing food and supplies and offers of help. The Pickering children were fascinated by the baby, peering at her green skin and small tusks with open curiosity that was infinitely preferable to fear or disgust. Old Haversham brought a wooden cradle he had made, beautiful and sturdy, perfectly sized. The settlement had accepted them completely now. The strange family on the edge of the frontier was just another family, and Willa was just another baby. It was exactly what Darya had hoped for and never quite believed would happen. As winter gave way to spring, Willa grew and thrived. She smiled early, reaching for faces she could not quite focus on yet. She made happy sounds when Zane sang to her and calmed instantly at the sound of Darya's voice. She was a perfect blend of both parents, human and orc mixed into something entirely new and entirely herself. On the spring equinox, exactly 1 year after their wedding, Darya and Zane stood together outside their cabin. The fields were ready for planting again, the cycle beginning anew. Willa was asleep in a sling against Darya's chest. Mira was playing nearby, building something elaborate out of sticks and mud. 1 year, Darya said quietly. Best year of my life, Zane replied immediately. Even though you lost the rest of your sight, even though you can barely see light and dark now, even though, especially because. He turned toward her, his hand finding her face with the ease of long practice. I lost my sight and gained everything else, a wife, 2 daughters, a home, a purpose. I would make that trade every single time. You are sure no regrets? None, she thought about it seriously. The question deserved a serious answer. She thought about the firewood on her porch and her angry march across the snow. She thought about crying alone in the dark and the terror of asking for help. She thought about everything that had happened since, all the joy and fear and hard work and love. No regrets, she said firmly. Only gratitude that I was stupid enough to tell you to stop and smart enough to come back when I realized what I had thrown away. He pulled her close, careful of the baby between them, and kissed her thoroughly. When they broke apart, both slightly breathless, he smiled. Want to know a secret? Always. I never would have stopped permanently. If you had not come back, if winter had gotten truly desperate, I would have started leaving Firewood again. I would have risked your anger and your pride because keeping you safe mattered more than respecting your boundaries. That is manipulative and high-handed and completely unfair. Yes, would you have forgiven me, eventually, after I finished being furious? She paused. Actually, I probably would have fallen in love with you even faster, because apparently I am attracted to stubborn men who refuse to let me suffer alone. Lucky for me. Lucky for both of us. They stood together, watching Mira play, feeling Willa breathe against Darya's chest, listening to the sounds of spring returning to the valley. The firewood was all stacked neatly now, enough to last through the next winter. Both porches had equal supplies organized and ready. Darya had split most of it herself, though Zane had helped with the stacking, his hands learning the shapes and creating the interlocking patterns he could no longer see. It was not the life either of them had imagined. It was better, messier and more complicated and infinitely more real. It was built on honesty and trust and the willingness to be vulnerable, to admit weakness, to ask for and accept help. It was built on firewood left in the dark and tears shed in understanding and second chances that neither of them had thought they deserved. I love you, Darya said quietly. I love you too. Zane's hand found hers. Thank you for the firewood. She laughed, the the sound carrying across the fields, and pulled him into another kiss while their daughter slept, and spring bloomed all around them, and everything, finally, was exactly as it should be.